Welcome to Standard 4A. The goal of this standard is to explain the motivations and roles of the explorers and conquistadors during the Age of Exploration. In this presentation, we'll just take the first part of that standard and explain the motivations of the explorers and conquistadors. We'll save the roles that they played for a second presentation and a separate video. Okay, so we'll go back in time and take a look at the essential question that we're hoping to answer in this presentation, which is why were Europeans interested in discovering new lands and markets during this time? So we're looking here at the late 1400s and into the 1500s and asking why Europe? What's going on to Europeans in and around Europe that causes them to be the ones to get on these little wooden boats and make these dangerous sea journeys that result in finding new lands and markets? Why wasn't it Asians? Why wasn't it Africans? What is it going on in Europe that's going to cause it to be them? In order to answer this question, it's going to help to have two pieces of essential understanding in mind. The first is that during this time period, again late 14 into the 1500s, the economies of Europe are expanding. They're doing better economically than they had been doing in centuries past. The bubonic plague of the 1300s is gone, and Europe's recovering and continuing to improve economically. And as a result, that's going to stimulate trade with markets in Asia. We have to keep in mind that at this period of time, Asia was the place you had to go in order to trade for the luxury goods, especially wealthy people in Europe wanted. That's where the silk and the porcelain, the textiles and the spices that they wanted were located. In order to get them back to Europe, you had to conduct trade with the Asian markets. As a result, we had a whole series of trade routes develop, most notably the Silk Road. And these were land routes that linked the markets of Asia back to the European markets. And we can think of these almost like the highways today. These are the routes that goods and products traveled. This trade system is going to experience a major event in the year 1453 when the Ottoman Turks, a group in the Middle East, are going to capture a city called Constantinople. You might remember it from your World I class as the capital of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire collapses and the Ottoman Turks are going to take over. And the result of that is that the countries of Western Europe, on the other side of Europe, those countries that front the Atlantic Ocean, have shoreline on the Atlantic Ocean, they're going to start seeking new maritime routes. And by maritime routes, we mean having to do with the ocean or the sea. For those of you who know or are learning Spanish, mar being the ocean or the sea. So looking for new water routes as a result of Constantinople being captured. Let's take a look at our maps again, and we want to focus in on this area right in here where Constantinople is. Constantinople kind of straddled Europe and Asia. It's an area known as Asia Minor here, and as we can see, all the trade routes kind of funnel into this part of Asia. We notice the trade routes are all fairly close. We can almost picture students coming from all parts of the building to the cafeteria and then having to navigate through the narrow lunch lines, and that's sort of the trade routes here going through Asia Minor. And if we zero in even further, we can see what's going on in this area. The Ottoman Turks, if we take a look at our key up here, by 1451, they control pretty much all of the area around Constantinople, and 2 years later they have Constantinople as well. It's not so much just Constantinople that matters here. It's the idea that the Ottomans now control this whole area, really of the Middle East today, and that area is often called the crossroads of the world. The Ottomans were a Muslim group. And keep in mind the Crusades were only a century or two before here in the Middle East. So the Ottomans weren't too keen on these Europeans who had grown accustomed, especially Italian traders, who would come down through Constantinople. The city-state of Venice in particular conducted a very lucrative trade on these trade routes. Now the Ottomans were hiking up the price of doing business. Okay, it was more expensive for the Europeans to come through this way, and that's going to prompt the countries facing the Atlantic to look for new trade routes. We'll try and put this all together here on one map. The Europeans are trying to go out here. They want to get out to India and China because that's where the silk, that's where the porcelain, the spices, and the textiles are located. For centuries they've been used to traveling these trade routes, these well-established silk roads linking Europe and Asia. As we can see though in the orange, the Ottoman Turks now have taken over, and that essentially puts up a roadblock. The Ottomans are saying, stop Europe, you can't come through here anymore doing business as usual. We now control this key part of the Silk Route, and if you want to do business with the Asian markets, you need to go through us. And that's going to increase the price of doing business for European traders. Now the countries back in Western Europe, countries that were further away from the Silk Roads, they're saying, well, if we can't go that way, maybe we can go by water. So countries like Spain, Portugal, France, England, the Netherlands, they're going to start seeking out the trade routes that the explorers we see in our next presentation are going to follow. Okay, so to answer our question, why were the Europeans the ones looking for new lands and new trade routes? Our answer is largely summarized in what are called the 3 Gs. Okay, and we'll denote those answers with the red letter G here on our next 3 slides. Our first one is an economic reason, which is gold. Okay, and gold in its forms both as an object and as money. The trade routes to Asia represented money. If you could get to Asia and get the stuff back, it represented a huge amount of wealth. Not only that, but the spices. People in Europe had grown accustomed to the spices, and especially wealthy people. Things we take for granted today, things like pepper and cinnamon, which we can find on a store shelf today, you had to get from Asia. Okay, so an economic reason here was gold. Okay, our second reason is a religious reason, and this is represented by God. Okay, so we have economics as gold, we have religious as God. Europeans were interested in the diffusion, and by diffusion we mean the spread or the movement of an idea or a thing. And they wanted to diffuse Christianity. Europe is largely a Christian continent, and as a religion, Christianity places a big emphasis on the spread of the religion to new people, people who aren't currently Christian, bringing them into the religious faith. There's religions like Christianity and Islam that put a big emphasis on bringing in new members. Had Europe been a largely Hindu continent or Jewish continent, religions that don't have as strong an emphasis on converting other people to the religion, Europeans wouldn't have as much motivation for religious reasons. But once they started uncovering North and South America and the millions of people who had never heard of their religion before, they then take it upon themselves to introduce the Native Americans and people along the trade routes that they follow to their religion of Christianity. So our second G is God. Our third G is more of a political one, and it's represented by the word glory. European countries at this time, they're almost like little kids. You can picture if you have siblings, maybe especially when you're younger, if a brother or sister gets a new toy, it's very common for a little kid to want the same toy themselves. You can almost picture Spain and Portugal. If Spain got a new piece of land, Portugal wanted a new piece of land. If France got a new colony, England wanted a new colony. So that political and economic competition going on between European countries was a big reason as well. So now we've got G for gold, an economic reason, G for God, and a religious reason, and a political reason here of glory. Okay, we also have two additional reasons here that don't fit into our two Gs, our three Gs. The first of these is innovations of economic and Islamic origins in the navigational arts. Okay, by innovations we mean inventions, new ways of doing things, new inventions. And by navigational we mean having to do with ships and boats and sailing. So in other words, we have new inventions coming out of Europe and the Islamic world having to do with boats and sailing. We can almost think about space travel today. I'm sure for thousands and thousands of years people looked at the moon and wished that they could go there. But it wasn't until the inventions, until the technology existed to take people to the moon, that it was possible. Same thing here. Europeans might have had the idea of traveling by sea to Asia, but they didn't have the technology. We see, for example, the caravel. We see it here in a cartoon version. If you've ever seen Columbus's ships portrayed in cartoons and movies and videos, those are caravels. They were ships with many different sails, different sizes, different shapes, all meant to maximize how much wind they were able to catch. They also had a new hull. The wooden part of the boat was improved, designed to not only be faster, but to be more stable for travel out in the open seas. We had instruments like the astrolabe, which was a way of measuring what line of latitude you were on. Again, out on the open seas, you don't have a lot of landmarks. Okay, so the astrolabe, you would point up at the North Star and hold the bottom of it even with the horizon, and the angle that you measured pretty much gave you the line of latitude that you were on. So a sailor or a crew trying to go a straight line across the Atlantic Ocean along the 35th parallel, the 35th line of latitude, they would measure 35 degrees and make sure they were on the right line. Okay, we also have things like the sextant for determining location out on the seas. We also have improved maps like the Mercator projection map, which was a new way of designing the map, a new way of spacing the map out, which yielded a more accurate and correct version of the world. Okay, and then our last one is an individual. We have a Portuguese prince named Henry, not to be confused with Henry VIII in England. This is a Portuguese prince. He's just waiting in line to be king, but as a prince, he's using his money, his influence, and his time to train, prepare, and fund the voyages of exploration. He starts up a school for explorers. He provides money, and he provides all the necessary equipment for people to go out and explore for Portugal. So the pioneering role, okay, and by pioneering we mean somebody with influence first or early on. And that was the role that Henry the Navigator plays. We see him here in a monument in Lisbon in Portugal. And that's Henry there at the front of the line standing up, and all the people lined up behind him are explorers. Okay, and this is right on the coast. They're looking out over the sea. So symbolically, it's showing that pioneering role that Henry played, leading all the explorers on their voyages as they go to head out. Okay, so these were the motivations for the Age of Exploration. In our second half of our presentation, we'll cover the roles that the explorers and conquistadors played.